Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute of Politics, I want to welcome you to the ARCO Forum and to welcome our guest speaker, the Minority Leader of the House of Representatives. He is praised by his colleagues in Congress for his considerable hard work, his knowledge of issues, and his near-legendary patience in hearing out divergent points of view. He is the kind of leader who sees public service not as a career, but as a calling. Introducing our speaker will be the Dean of the Kennedy School of Government, Joseph Nye, a renowned scholar in matters of national and international security. Dean Nye has served in the top echelons of the U.S. Departments of State and of Defense and has been an advisor to U.S. presidents. Here at Harvard, he has launched a major inquiry into how we Americans can best govern our public affairs in the next century. The project, which brings together practitioners and academics, is called Visions of Governance in the 21st Century. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Nye.
Thank you very much, Phil. This evening we're very fortunate to have Dick Gebhardt with us. It's an event that's co-sponsored by the Institute of Politics Student Advisory Committee and the Kennedy School's Campaigns and Elections Professional Interest Group. So students are behind it. The south side of St. Louis has been called the geographical and political center of Middle America. You can't be more central than that. And tonight's speaker, House Minority Leader Dick Gebhardt, grew up there and has represented the 3rd Congressional District since 1976. After completing his law degree in 1965, he worked in a St. Louis law firm for 6 years and then won election in 1971 as an alderman from the south side of St. Louis. In 1976, he was elected to Congress and in a remarkable event for a freshman, got a seat on the House Ways and Means Committee, perhaps foretelling what was going to be his future career. He made a mark on a number of important issues. One in particular in the 1980s where he was a leader was in the area of tax reform, where he supported President Reagan's 1981 tax cut and co-sponsored with then Senator Bill Bradley the bill that became the basis for the 1986 tax reform. In 1989, Dick Gebhardt was elected House Majority Leader, and he held that position through the stormy first couple of years of the Clinton administration. But then in 1994, in what he is quoted as describing as one of the worst days of his life, he had to hand over the gavel to Newt Gingrich, who then became Speaker, and Dick Gebhardt became Minority Leader. He has been an innovator in the area of campaign finance reform and in many other issues, and USA Today has called him the perfect combination of a fiery populist and a quiet backroom pragmatist. He speaks to us tonight on what unites us, our core democratic values. Please join me in welcoming Missouri Congressman and House Minority Leader Dick Gebhardt.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nye, for that excellent introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. I thank everyone for the opportunity to be here, and I'm always pleased these days to be properly introduced so you know my name. What happens to you when you're on C-SPAN, as I guess we are tonight, is that people see you in public places. They know they've seen you before, but they can't quite remember who you are. And recently I was in the airport, I think in Chicago, and a man came up to me and I could see the wheels turning in his head, and he came up and he said, "Boy, I know you, but I can't put the face with the name." He said, "You're either Jack Kemp or you sold me an insurance policy in Denver." So it's good to be properly introduced. I'm truly honored to be here at Harvard and at the School of Government, named for a president who challenged us to re-examine prevailing assumptions and what he called the myths of conventional wisdom. 4 decades ago, John Kennedy was campaigning across this country, telling an affluent but anxious society that America had to do better. And for all the turmoil and tragedy that followed, we did that. with a still unfinished revolution in civil rights and equal rights, with a continuing revolution in economic policy that affects all of us today, with a defense and foreign policy that secured a path toward victory in the Cold War. This nation met great challenges and came far closer to fulfilling both its promise and its creed. In many ways, we truly did cross a new frontier. I believe that we stand now at another pivot point in our history and world history. In a new era of globalization, the forces of commerce and technology are weaving the world closer and closer together. But widening inequalities of income are pulling our people further apart. Families and communities show the strain of struggling to get ahead. And our nation's institutions, from school places to workplaces, have lagged behind the pace of change. For most Americans, the status quo is not working. These are certainly not the worst of times, but they're also not the best of times. In many ways, they're the most stressed of times. The good news is welcome and well known. 6 years of economic recovery have generated 13 million new jobs. Our federal deficit is declining, and the most successful among us are prospering as never before. It is an age of transition. American businesses and workers have made a difficult passage into the new economy, but have emerged to lead our country once again into world economic leadership. At great cost, businesses have downsized, retooled, and re-engineered themselves. With extraordinary effort, workers have relocated their families, learned new skills, and tackled new challenges in the mainstream of their careers. This is no small achievement. It is a huge testament to the American genius for adapting to change. It's also truly an age of wonder. The riches of the information age are being felt by all of us, from the internet to the internationalization of trade, to the inconceivable breakthroughs that we're seeing in medical science. Is there anything more exciting and hopeful than the promises of an interconnected world, one where all nations have access to a free flow of ideas and products, where electronic commerce creates a brisk growth in a world economy, and where ignorance and sickness could be banished from the earth? Despite the profits and promise of this new economy, old problems are enduring and urgent. For politicians, it may be the course of least resistance to celebrate the success that we've had. But if we care about the long-term strength and stability of this society, we dare not shrink from facing the other facts of our national condition. Listen, most families are barely earning more than their counterparts in 1973. They're maintaining their standard of living only by working longer hours. In many cases, 140 more hours each year than Americans did just 2 decades ago. The loss here, I want you to understand, is not just a material loss. As fathers and mothers spend more time on the job, working late at their office or on workshop floors, they lack the time or the energy to do their most vital responsibility, which is to raise their children, teach them values, and guide them through a bewildering culture, glittering with both new learning and new dangers. This problem affects all Americans, whatever their income, occupation, or background. In our communities, citizens are pressed to give time to churches and synagogues, PTAs, and little leagues, the countless voluntary enterprises that are the strongest threads in the fabric of our community. As the trends become clearer, we may face a threat to something that truly has brought us together as a nation, a sense of common economic destiny. The current recovery has not narrowed, but indeed widened the gap between the wealthy and the working class, and between those in persistent poverty and those in mainstream America. Maybe worst of all, the percentage of children living in poverty continues to grow by the month, by the year. This has been a recovery of paradoxes. Contrary to what Jack Kennedy said, a rising tide has not lifted all boats. It's only lifted some boats. There are more jobs, but average income languishes. There's less health care coverage with lower benefits. And as we retreat from each other economically, Americans are in danger of losing a sense of common destiny with each other. The growth of this isolation is the breeding ground for intolerance and extremism. The recent episodes of skinhead racist violence in Denver shows that this is a clear and present danger. Yet there are also powerful signs that Americans are determined to work together to solve the problems. You could see that spirit at work from the UPS strike of a few weeks ago to the Promise Keepers and the Million Women March. So what prevents us from seizing this decisive moment and addressing the great issues, the great challenges that affect us today? Our people have not failed, but our politics is failing our people. Today, the political process has largely become an echo chamber of petty charges, a parade ground for poll-driven maneuvers. Too often, our leaders seem enamored with small ideas that seem to nibble around the edges of big problems. The average voter feels that the debate in Washington and in state capitals across the country is a meaningless argument between political adversaries, a debate that's irrelevant to their daily lives and their dearest values. There's a dangerous vacuum where principled politics should be today. It's a time to fill that vacuum with a great debate about the condition and the direction of our country. It's time to address, not avoid, the issues that are before us on an unequal economy, a fractured society, and an unresponsive political process. Today, I'd like to begin to try to initiate this debate. I'm here to argue for a bold, progressive new direction for the new economy. The approach I advocate is in the great tradition of Americans working together to promote a growing economy with a shared prosperity, stable families, strong communities, and a spirited democracy. You know, this isn't the first time in our history that an abundance of riches has left us with a host of unsolved problems. We as a nation confronted a similar challenge about 100 years ago. At the beginning of this century, America underwent a great transformation from an agricultural to an industrial economy, from small towns to great cities, and from regional to national markets. Then as now, while the economy grew at a robust pace, most families struggled against overwhelming odds. Politics was dominated by big money, and Americans argued about how to answer these upheavals. Some wanted to turn the clock back to a more tranquil time. Others said the new economy would inevitably benefit everyone, and the best thing government could do was absolutely nothing. But a strong grassroots movement arose in this country. The progressive movement knew that the economy was changing and that America had to change with it. It was a movement that began from the bottom up, but found a home with Teddy Roosevelt's Republicans and later Woodrow Wilson's and Franklin Roosevelt's Democratic Party. It was a movement which demanded reform to ensure that economic growth was not an end in itself. They demanded an economy that met the needs of the broad middle class. They outlawed child labor, busted monopolies, and set minimum standards for a national economy. And their achievements fueled the greatest economic success in the history of the world. This movement marked a striking change from the past and from the seemingly unchangeable doctrines of the old economics. As a result of its achievements, the progressives made a modernized and national economy work for working Americans through a long, unprecedented period of growth and rising standards of living. Today, I believe we're in the midst of another transformation equally as profound as the change of over 100 years ago. From separate national economies to a global marketplace, driven by a revolution of information and technology. We can and should welcome this without repeating the old error of the earlier Industrial Revolution, the belief that everything must and should be left to market forces alone. We need a new progressivism for a new century. In this new global era, we must fight for a crucial, if limited, role for government as a positive instrument of our common interests and our common values. This is not a call for protectionism, a return to the past, or resistance to the future. It is itself a call to far-reaching change, a call to harness the vast potential of this new economy to raise the incomes of our people, reduce inequality, and assert our values and interests all across the globe. This must not be an effort to abandon defining principles, but to find new ways of achieving them. That's been my goal throughout my career, whatever label has been pinned to my lapel from time to time. I've been called an Atari, new, and sometimes now an old Democrat. While the press analysis has shifted, I haven't. I've always fought for traditional democratic values, and I've worked to find new ways to further them. In 1977, when I first came into the Congress, I was among Democrats who developed different approaches to controlling crime, expanding the economy, and improving education, both by investing in it and by holding schools accountable for their performance. While I was labeled an Atari Democrat, I was never among those who believed that this nation could or should abandon its industrial base for a database. But I was among those who understood that we did and do need both, and that for America the ultimate purpose for both is to create opportunity for the middle class and for those who are working hard to join it. As a co-founder and the first chairman of the Democratic Leadership Council, I believe that we had to broaden our base without abandoning our strongest supporters. We generated new ideas, from tax credits for the working poor to tougher laws against violent crime, many of which would be enacted by the Clinton administration. There are few, if any, Democrats anywhere who would disagree with the inclusive and mainstream approach of the early days of the DLC. That experience can be a model for a change that is principled and pragmatic, matched both to the time we live in and to the idea of the country we aspire to be. But the challenge is far greater now, for it truly is a new world, and not just the issues that we face. And now more than ever, pragmatism, as important as it is, cannot be a substitute for the principles that give us purpose and direction in a time of rapid change. This is a different approach from some who now label themselves as New Democrats, but who set their compass only off the direction of others, who talk about the political center, but fail to understand that if it's only defined by others, it lacks core values, and who too often market a political strategy masquerading as a policy. Of course, we always must question ourselves and our thinking. The debate's healthy. It strengthens us and adds vital intellectual energy to our political and public discourse. But we should also have the confidence to be who we are. We have to have the confidence to be what we believe, not a slightly more compassionate version of the other side or a constantly shifting combination of tactics and momentary calculation. We all get our values in different ways. I receive mine from my family, my teachers, and my church. My values are about treating everyone with fairness and giving everyone the opportunity to succeed. They are about holding people responsible for improving our society, defending the freedom of all people, and honoring the bonds of community which hold us together as a nation. These are the values that have guided me through my public life as a Democrat. Democrats must constantly remember our core values. They are our lodestar. We must be guided by them, not by a blind belief in the power of government. If we lose sight of these values, we lose the very identity and soul of the Democratic Party. We must take a bath, not backwards in an impossible quest to repeat the achievements of the past, but forward to a project as great as any in our history. To set rules for a revolutionary new economy and prepare all of our people to take advantage of its prosperity. Looking forward, Democrats should pursue these 5 fundamental goals to further our values. First, we must strive toward a high-growth economy that serves all of our people. Growth is not a guarantee of fairness and opportunity, but it is the precondition. We cannot be the party of fairness without being also the party of growth. In an economy that grows too slowly, too many are told to settle for too little. The majority inevitably have smaller paychecks than they should and less time for family and community. And a sluggish economy translates into a splintering society as those who are losing ground blame those who have even less. Our current policy is restricted by the limits and fears of the past. In the new economy, it's increasingly clear the old limits may not apply. We need to push the envelope of growth beyond what has been acceptable in the status quo. Our challenge is not to do as well as we have been or even a little better. The challenge is to do far better. Consider just a moment tonight the difference between whether we grow by 2.3% or 3% over the next 10 years. That difference simply equals an additional $3.1 trillion worth of domestic growth and product. Enough to keep Social Security solvent, enough to invest all we need in children's schools and in people's skills. We must insist that those investments be made. In the new economy, international capital flows, global trade advancing technologies, and the demand for customized goods and services all place a premium on the talents and the training of all of our people. Our nation must have greater goals than merely achieving numerical balance in the federal budget. We must dedicate ourselves to achieving higher growth in our economy and the skill levels of all of our people. It's not enough to draw down the debt our children will inherit. We must also expand the opportunities our babies will enjoy. If we do, the 21st century will also be the second American century. Second, we must honor and reward work to support our most important institution, the American family. As I said at the outset, for almost 25 years, the rewards for work have diminished in relation to the effort made. We often speak of the dignity of work, but we steadily suffer from the demeaning of work. Let me emphasize again that the stagnancy in wages spans all but the top, the very top of our economy today. Living standards are stagnant, even for men with 4 years of college. We have seen mass layoffs of productive employees in the prime of their careers by profitable corporations. In the midst of economic growth, we've experienced an unprecedented rise, farming work out to contract employees, a steady decline in benefits ranging from health coverage to retirement security. Low-wage workers cannot even count on the minimal health benefits that welfare recipients have under Medicaid. And after the recent increase, the minimum wage, $5.15 in force today, buys less than it did in 1968. The heroic efforts of American workers, working harder minute by minute every day just to tread water, has caused major negative consequences for America's families. What happened to the belief that if you work hard and play by the rules, you deserve a chance to succeed in the respect of society? Whether you spend your day in a daycare center chasing after toddlers or on Wall Street chasing financial transactions. Our historic commitment to fairness and opportunity demands that people share in the expanding pie that they help to create. We got to raise the minimum wage again and fight for extra tax incentives for businesses to provide benefits like health care and child care that support the American family. We got to have a national debate with the Republicans to work for a simpler, fair, and flatter tax system. Our current system, tailored to the needs of the lobbyists and special interests, works against America's working families when it should be working with them and for them. We got to stand against Republican efforts to redistribute wealth upwards under the guise of a flat tax or a national sales tax, masquerading as reform. Yet we must offer a real, bona fide alternative. You can't beat something with nothing. I proposed a tax plan that closes the loopholes. It ensures everyone pays their fair share. It permanently ends the influence of special interests. It dramatically lowers tax rates. 3/4 of Americans would pay at a rate of 10%, and the rest would pay at progressive rates. We can do this without increasing the deficit if we have the will to fight for the interests of the middle class and close down the special interest loopholes. We must also challenge outworn assumptions about corporate structures. How can we organize our workplaces so that working Americans can have a stronger voice in improving the quality of their products? How can we modernize our labor laws to facilitate harmonious relationships in the workplace? And how can working Americans be better rewarded for their increasing, now in the last 3/4, highly increasing productivity? Today, these questions, which cut to the heart of the issues of fairness and opportunity, aren't even on the agenda. We must move them to the center of the economic debate. One issue that's already there, at least rhetorically, is my third goal. In the new economy, the organizing principle of our society, must be raising all of our babies to be responsible and productive citizens. We must ensure that every American, believes that our most important personal duty is to make certain that every child is a responsible, productive citizen. We've seen what we can accomplish in peacetime and in war when we focus our national energies on one purpose. We got to bring the same dedication to the teaching and raising of children as we brought to the struggle against fascism and communism. Just as John Kennedy inspired his generation to give something back to America, Democrats of the 21st century must inspire every American to commit ourselves to the education, the training, the raising of all of our children. While visiting schools in my district, I saw that there are important things that schools can do to better the educational outcome of their students. One part is providing more preschool and after school, but it was clear that even the greatest successes comes from getting each parent involved in the work of each child and in the work of the school. Principals and teachers must motivate parents to play a critical partnering role in the operation of their schools. They must get parents involved, not just occasionally with homework, but actually physically coming to the schools regularly to volunteer. When I asked one parent why she comes to volunteer in her child's school, she told me, "You know, it really helped my two kids succeed. When they see me here in school, it really tells them that what they're doing here every day is really important." But she said, "You know, I really feel that all of these children are my children." All Americans must understand this. If we fail one child, we fail our entire society. If we can get every American to share a fraction of that woman's passion, to take some responsibility, personal responsibility, for raising and teaching all of our children, our national goal would be achieved overnight. In addition to challenging every American to participate in the education of our youth, we must then explore and evaluate new ideas to help today's busy families successfully raise their children. Our school day and our school year was scheduled for the rhythms of an agricultural land. Our schools were structured to the models of an industrial America. Now our schools must meet the needs of working parents and an information age. We should expand the school day and the school year, not only to keep our children off the mean streets, but to prepare them for the next century. Let's consider new ways of expanding the reach of best practices from smaller classes to specialized schools, because these grassroots efforts will help our children meet world-class standards. Let's repair our collapsing school buildings. Let's improve teacher development and training so that our children are safe, ready, and able to learn. And let's challenge our schools with what I like to call rewards for results, extra assistance for schools that raise their students' measurements year by year, month by month. We have much to learn about how to better educate our children, but we know one thing for certain. The last thing American education needs is a false reform that drains scarce resources from public education. While Republicans wrongly declare all of education a failure, Democrats must devote our energies to improving public education, the fundamental foundation of our democracy for all of our children. Our fourth goal updates and upholds this tenet, that our country has a solemn responsibility to a basic level of health and retirement for each American. We must preserve and not privatize Social Security and Medicare. The wealthiest and healthiest among us may not need that help now, but they can afford to contribute a fair share instead of opting out and looking out just for themselves. No one ever said in 1936 or in 1964 that changes would not be needed in these programs as facts and circumstances changed. But we must not be deceived by the overly pessimistic forecasts of our friends in the other party. We must not embrace change that threatens the quality and soundness of our obligation to our fellow citizen and that frays the bonds of community. We must take up the fallen standard of national health care reform. One defeat doesn't excuse a permanent retreat. We must renew our commitment to the goal of secure health coverage for every working family and the protection of quality care for those who are already covered. No working father or mother should lay awake at night worrying that a loved one will die or suffer because they don't have health care coverage. The power brokers in Washington may have stopped talking about the health care issue, but I can tell you from personal experience that the working families outside Washington never stopped talking about it. Of course, there's room for debate about the shape of reform, about the mix of private and public responsibility, but there's no longer room in a just society for failing to ensure full and quality coverage as a basic human American right. Lastly, we recognize our values do not stop at national borders, and neither must our efforts. To serve our interests and save our values at home, we now must advance them in a wider world. In the end, the market is a mechanism, not a morality. It counts everything when we gain and lose, but it doesn't even weigh the claims of justice. More than 100 years ago, as America's national economy emerged, progressives began the work of linking capitalism with values. And their efforts not only made capitalism gentler, but stronger as well. Today, as America is immersed in a global economy, our challenge is once again to link capitalism with values and standards. It's time to fight for the idea that if we could set minimum standards on a national scale, then we must strive for minimum standards in a globalized economy. Production and profits should not be purchased by poisoning the environment, violating basic human rights, and exploiting child and slave labor. It is our task now to slowly and painstakingly bring values and standards to the global economy, like the standards that were achieved in America over 100 years, and standards that we still fight for every day. As Wei Jingsheng, the newly released Chinese activist, said 2 weeks ago in New York, and I quote, "Those who already enjoy democracy, liberty, and human rights should not allow their own personal happiness to numb them into forgetting the many others who are still struggling against tyranny, slavery, and poverty." He added that the only reason the Chinese government has ever engaged in a dialogue over these issues has been pressure from the United States and other trading partners. This country stands for so much more than simply making money or great military power. Our greatest strength, our very greatest strength, is our unshakable commitment to the universal rights of all human beings to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what gave the recent debate over fast track its purpose and its passion. It wasn't just a debate about trade, and it surely wasn't a debate about which special interests should prevail. It was a debate about freedom, about American values, and about the beginning of a discussion of these issues in the whole world. We can and we must begin to build a global economy that lifts up and not drags down our people and all the people of the world. This is not protectionism. It's not isolationism, but a new and active internationalism which firmly engages the entire world. We cannot achieve the America we want unless we stand for the world we want. The task will not be easy, but it's the central obligation of our generation, and it will be a legacy for the entire world. This will be an era of small issues in our politics, only if fearful and calculating politicians make it so. The times themselves are bringing profound transformations. We will direct them or will be dominated by them. Both the substance and the spirit of our society depend now on our will to meet and master a new global economic revolution. To do this, we need a Democratic Party where principles trump tactics. We need a Democratic Party that's a movement for change and a movement for values and not a money machine. We must try to be the party of the people, of working families in the middle class here at home, and of those around the world whose lives can be lifted up by a shared global prosperity of minimum standards and maximum growth. Don't tell me there are no great battles to fight in 1997 and beyond. We stand at a rare moment. Like others before us, we can challenge the status quo and create a progressive vision for a new century. And to succeed, we all must rise to the occasion. Thank you for letting me be here this evening.
We now have time for questions. There are 4 microphones, 2 here on this floor, 2 at the balcony. Let me remind you that a question is something brief that ends with a question mark, and they come 1 per customer. If somebody violates that rule, I'll have to shut them off. The other thing I'd like to have the first question in each microphone be from a Harvard student, please. So now let's turn to questions.
You talked about trying to make economic growth so it helps all Americans, including the middle class and poor Americans. And you briefly mentioned the income tax proposals you've made. But beyond that, what do you specifically propose in terms of allowing growth to help all Americans, including everyone in the country?
Well, in addition to continuing to have a progressive income tax, which I think is important, although I'm for a simplified and reformed one, I think there are other measures, some of which I mentioned, that we need to take. One is to keep the minimum wage up to inflation and to not let it erode as it so dramatically has over the past years. Secondly, I think we need to induce on the corporate side of the tax corporations to pay workers for their productivity. We need changes in the labor and other laws to encourage corporations to bring employees more into the operation of their corporations, more into profiting from the profits of the corporation, a more collaborative or more harmonious relationship. I'll tell one story. There's a company in Springfield, Missouri called Springfield Remanufacturing, and to make a long story short, they really were in trouble, about 150 employees. The owner pulled everybody into a room, put the balance sheet up on a blackboard, said, "We borrowed a bunch of money to keep this going. I'm going to give you stock options and bonuses if we can hit different balance sheet." Taught everybody how to read it. Make a long story short, That was in 1984. Today in Springfield, Missouri, there are 3,000 employees. There were 150, and there are 20 different corporations. And the janitor of the original corporation is the CEO of the newest corporation. And as Jack Stack says, capitalism has two parts. One is creating value, and then there's the distribution of value. And he said you can't create value without information. You have to empower workers. You have to really let them know what's happening. What are the numbers? What makes it work? Make them think like owners. And then cut them into the action. And he said, you know what? You'll make much more money than you ever thought. It's a wonderful process, but you got to believe in people. You got to trust people. You got to cut people in. You got to incent people. You got to have a different relationship than the one we've had. And to do those things, we need to think differently on all ends of the equation.
Let's ask you to identify yourselves when you ask questions so Congressman Gebhardt knows who's asking.
Congressman, Ted Halstead, student here at the Kennedy School. You've spoken eloquently about the need for new tax ideas and for reclaiming the tax debate from conservatives. I'd like to ask you why the Democratic Party continues ignoring what is now the largest and most damaging tax on American families. 70% of American families now pay more in payroll taxes than in federal income taxes, and yet this is the most regressive tax, it's the most anti-work, it cripples small businesses, and it's the one that's rising the fastest. So my question is, why would this reduction of the payroll tax not be a centerpiece of your economic platform? And specifically, why not use new pollution taxes to replace the payroll tax, thereby creating more jobs, more wages, and less pollution? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I agree with your thought that it is an increasingly regressive tax. That's part of the reason that a few years ago we took the cap off the Medicare part of the payroll tax, and I think that was a move in the right direction, and it helped progressivity of that tax. In 1978, Bill Bradley and I had a proposal to give a credit against the income tax for the payroll tax. There have been others who've suggested it since. It's always a new idea, and it's one that we need to, again, consider. Again, to go back to my income tax proposal, without including a discussion of the Social Security tax, and we certainly could and should do that, and I think it would fit well. What I was striving to do with the income tax was to get to the lowest possible rate while keeping the most important deduction, which is the home mortgage interest deduction. And if you do that and you throw everything else out, you can get to an individual rate of 10%. Now that's a big step in the right direction for 3/4 of taxpayers. 75% of taxpayers would have a 10% rate. Now if you can add to that a credit or some mechanism to deal with the Social Security tax, which I'd be very interested in pursuing, you've got a much better tax system than you have today.
Left side of the balcony.
Hi, my name is Robert Yoon. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I remember when you ran for president, you ran a series of ads speaking about some foreign economic threats. The ad in particular that I remember, you were standing on a dock and you're surrounded by, I believe they were all white dock workers, and behind you there were large crates being offloaded from cargo ships, and they were labeled Japan, then China, and South Korea, Indonesia. Do you see any parallels between the way that ad was constructed and the way Jesse Helms constructed the White Hands ad in his Senate race a few years later? And given what you said about against protectionism and for unity and all that, would you run the same ads again if you had the chance to do it over?
Let me refresh your memory on what the ad said. After you help pay for these ads, you do remember them. The ad basically was trying to point out that when we send then a Chrysler K car, not many of them around anymore, but when we send a Chrysler K car to South Korea, at the time they added tariffs and taxes to an imported automobile that got the cost of that car in delivery in South Korea to $48,000 per car. That was a lot of money now, and it was certainly a lot of money in 1987. And I pointed out that a Hyundai, which came from South Korea, would sell for about $9,000, $8,000. And I was simply trying to point out an issue that I think we finally got on the trade agenda of the country in the 80s, and that was the issue of access to foreign markets. Equal access, a level playing field for trade with developed or highly developing countries like Japan, South Korea, etc. And I think, you know, it was the right thing to say. It was the right issue to bring up. We've made a lot of progress on that issue. Today, even academics who rejected it as protectionism now say, well, maybe there's a point here. Maybe it is pretty hard to get into that market. You even have academics who have studied these markets for a long time saying, we do need to take aggressive action to get equal, proper access. And in the GATT, which I voted for, and the WTO, which I support, we have brought access issues to the top of the agenda. And people now know you don't just talk about tariffs, you have to talk about actual non-tariff barriers that keep you out of markets. So we made some progress. We're not there yet. Incidentally, in fact, that transaction with South Korea on an automobile would be precisely the same today, probably a little higher with inflation. Things have not changed dramatically. So even though we have the issue at the top of the agenda, we haven't made a lot of progress. But what I was trying to say tonight is that while access is still an issue, the next set of issues is in free trade treaties with developing countries where the issue must be standards or values, workers' rights, human rights, environmental protections, bringing those issues into the trade context. The big fight over fast track was that the Republican version of fast track not only didn't bring up those issues for negotiation or generally allow them, they didn't allow them. They specifically said you can't negotiate on those issues. And I believe if we're going to have intellectual property protections and capital property protections in free trade treaties, which we have in NAFTA, with trade sanctions to enforce them, we certainly ought to have it on workers' rights and environmental protections. They're just as relevant. They're just as important to the relationship. Let me finally say, if we don't get these standards to move standards of living slowly upward, and believe me, I have no illusions, it will take years in some of these countries to get their own laws properly enforced so we can get standards up. But if we don't, we will never fulfill the promise of trade and capitalism. You know, the Republicans have talked about supply side. They're right, it's real important. But I'm a Democrat. I also believe in demand side. And our problem today in the world is not supply, it's demand. Look at Asia. You've got a deflation going on across Asia. They're throwing the products out. They have no problem producing anything in as much quantity as you want. There's nobody there to buy it in their own countries. Now, South Korea, Japan, standard of living has gone up. China, no. India, usually no. Mexico, no. Brazil, no. So we've got to bring to the trade table internationally, or certainly in free trade treaties bilaterally or multilaterally, these very relevant and very important issues. We should not have another free trade treaty, as in NAFTA, that shunts it off to the side, says we'll put it in side agreements without real teeth. Not important, not really good enough to look at. Send it over to the ILO, send it to the UN, send it to somebody, but let's not be serious about it. I want to be serious about it, and I think the American people do too, and I think the people of the world do.
Right side is Val.
My name is Josh Gibson. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. If you were to decide to run for president in the year 2000, humor me here.
I always do.
One of your key tasks would be to differentiate yourself from Vice President Gore. One way to do this would be to help stymie a number of Clinton-Gore initiatives, in effect leading to a lame duck Clinton-Gore administration. Is this a price you're willing to pay?
Well, first of all, your question contains assumptions that are horribly premature and not appropriate. And I really mean that. I have an obligation to represent 500,000 people in Missouri, and I take that very seriously. The greatest honor in my life, other than marrying Jane Gephardt, which is the greatest honor anyone could ever have, and I'm serious about that, is being in the Congress and having 500,000 people put their trust in your hands. And you can't do that if you're not paying attention. Secondly, I want to win a majority in the House, and I feel very strongly about that for the values that I've tried to talk about tonight. And those two jobs take 100% of my time. You know, one of the things that I think is wrong with our politics is we start these elections way too early. They go on forever. And we try to infuse these future possible political contests into every issue that's in front of us. Every issue that's in front of us. I can make you an argument that President Clinton, who I like and admire, has had better cooperation and support from Democrats in the Congress than even Lyndon Johnson did in the middle 60s. He was the master of the Congress. You know, and we haven't gotten everything done. We failed on health care. I'll take as much blame as anybody. But it's still important, and we need to go back to it. This president has gotten a crime bill through that I think has had a part, not the only thing, but had a big part in getting crime rates down in every major city in this country. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what he did. And we had Republicans and Democrats voting for that bill. I sat in my office and worked with Republicans to try to get their votes to vote for that bill. This president has gotten a lot done in trade. And frankly, this president, I think, would have been for a free trade negotiating authority that included, as an explicit matter, labor and worker rights and environmental rights. We don't control the Congress. You know, the speaker kept saying the president didn't produce enough votes for this fact. I said, what is this? It's his bill. He wrote it. He didn't let us add anything to it. He ought to pass the bill. So I think your question assumes a lot of thoughts that aren't quite correct. I think we are working well together. I think the president is accomplishing a lot. I think the economy, as I said in my speech, is better now than it's been in 15 years, maybe longer. There's real advance here to celebrate, but there are real problems that we all recognize and that remain and that must be addressed in an urgent manner.
Hello, I'm a student at MIT.
I don't get all the nuances, but whatever.
You may tell from the question. But speaking of Congress, I want to ask you about an issue of growing congressional importance as well as lobbying on Capitol Hill. Given developments just last month when electric power deregulation proposals finally made it into Congressman Schaefer and Dingell's subcommittee on energy, I'm wondering what you, as the Democratic leader in the House, think of A, the contents, and B, the prospects of electrical deregulation federally.
First, I believe that this is an issue that we need to address, need to learn about, need to find out a lot more about before we try to start to act. Secondly, we have an experiment going on in some of the states, and most importantly probably California, which is a very big state, that is moving actively in the direction of deregulation. They have tried at the state level to deal with a lot of the biggest controversies and problems. And I believe before we thrust ourselves headlong into this, we ought to take a little bit of time to best understand the experience in the states, what the states are accomplishing, what they aren't accomplishing, and then how that might guide us to better deal with this set of issues. It is complicated. It's far-reaching. I don't rule out at all the possibility of being able to do something nationally. I don't think it's this year. I don't think it's next year. I think it's sometime either in the last 2 years of the Clinton administration or beyond.
I'm Matt Bailey from the Kennedy School. I guess what I'm wondering about is, you mentioned the importance of the increasing globalization of our economy, but it seems to me that some of your trade policies might go against that, that whole concept of the economy. How would you position on trade change if American companies started laying off workers, say, because we couldn't compete as well against, foreign companies in contracts?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say and understand that we're immersed in a global economy. No one's going to stop that. You can't go back. With today's transportation and communications, you have to be in a global economy. So, the thing that's always really amused me about this debate is that people are called protectionists. I don't know of many protectionists. I haven't met many people, maybe there are a few, there might even be one in this room, who really advocates putting protective barriers around the American economy, putting high Smoot-Hawley type tariffs to say that you can't trade with this economy. The question is not whether to trade. The question is how to engage in trade. That's the debate. That's where the active debate is. And what I'm arguing for is a firm, aggressive, I believe, sensible position that says that trade, to be really synergistic, to really be beneficial to all, has to be trade where there's compatibility. What do I mean by compatibility? What I mean is that no one, absolutely no one, would question trade between Missouri and Illinois, trade between Massachusetts and Rhode Island, Massachusetts and New York. It's the same country, same people, same culture, same tradition, same language, same money, same legal system. It's absolutely no question it's fair. No one would question it. So the goal in global trade is, over time, and it will take lots of time, is to get the level of compatibility worldwide that we have enjoyed in the United States. Now, that's a tall order. European community, I would note, has taken years, and they still aren't there. They're still fighting about currency and lots of other important issues. They still aren't there. Let me tell you something. I met with the European negotiators before we started to negotiate NAFTA, who had negotiated a lot of the European Union provisions. And they asked me, they said, how much money are you going to put in transition for moving to a free trade treaty between Mexico and Canada? And I said, oh, probably $500 million, maybe as much as $1 billion. They laughed. They were hysterical. At the time, the European Union was spending $12 billion a year. You know what they spend today? $21 billion a year on transition. On transition. Both in the developing countries they're trying to bring in, Spain, Portugal, Greece, etc., and in the countries that are already more developed that they're trying to include them in. Worker training, real worker training. Support programs for people that are thrown out of jobs, infrastructure to move the products back and forth. You go to the border with Mexico today, there's no infrastructure. We got a drug problem at the border with Mexico. Why? Because they wave through 10, 20 trucks at a time. We don't have the people there to inspect the trucks. They stand for hours on the highway. We don't have enough highways. And talk about environment, I mean, it's a joke. I call it free trade on the cheap. It's ridiculous. We wouldn't dream of doing it in the states of the United States. Why would we think that we can do this on the cheap? That it even works for capitalism? That it even works for the companies that are involved? Surely we can do better than this. So, I feel strongly about this. Trade is here to stay. It is important. I believe in it. It has the promise of lifting everybody's standard of living. Let me tell you something. American cars, just take one example. American cars today are far better in quality and in cost because of the competition from Japan and South Korea and Europe. No doubt about it. It shook up the whole industry. It made management better. It made the unions better. It made the workers better. It was terrific. Now, wouldn't it been even better if we could have actually gotten some of our products into some of the other markets? I mean, we only got the benefit here. They should have gotten some benefit out of this. Really, I'm serious. I'm deadly serious. Trade is synergistic. It's win, 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 win. Everybody's standard goes up. Competition works. But you can't compete if you have such horrible incompatibility that it doesn't work. And that's what I'm trying to raise.
My name is Matt Smith. I'm an ensign in the Navy and a grad student at MIT. You've laid out a vision where America exercises enormous global influence in both economics and human rights. And I'm curious where the U.S. military what its role is in this vision, and where you see the size of the U.S. military going relative to, say, what it is today.
Well, first, I think, as I tried to say, that there are very important components to our leadership ability in the world. One is our economy. Can't do anything if the economy doesn't function at a high level. Second, and I talked about this a lot, are our values and our standards. Phil Sharp was a colleague of mine in the late 80s, and we both remember the Black Caucus members going to the floor to argue for an end to apartheid in South Africa. And I remember when Bill Gray and Ron Dellums came to the floor, and everybody laughed at them. You're going to cut off trade with South Africa? Nobody will follow. We'll lose all these contracts. Then it was said we'll hurt the very people we're trying to help in South Africa. They'll lose their jobs. No one will follow us. This is stupid. And they just kept on. Every day they kept on. And they finally got the embargo basically put through. Ronald Reagan vetoed it. We overrode the veto. And then that Sunday morning, I remember watching television. Nelson Mandela comes out of prison. Now he's the president of the country. That's leading with moral force. That's values. That's standards. Wei Jingsheng comes out of prison and gives the talk he gave in New York. That's power. Now, where does the military come in? Obviously, the third leg to the stool is military power. Now, the hard part is that it's all changed. What we saw as the threat is no longer the threat. We're going to fight a land war in Europe. That's most of what we were prepared to do. That's most of what we spent money on. Those were the weapons, those were the munitions, those were the training missions that we put people on. It's all changed. And right now the Pentagon is undergoing a very needed, tough, disciplined look at what are the threats. And up until now they've been saying, well, it's two Persian Gulf wars at once, basically. But now they're questioning that, and I think they must. Because if you really look at what's happening in the world, I believe the threats are varied and complicated. It's a Haiti, it's a Bosnia, it's a North Korea possibility, it is ethnic tensions, it's terrorism, it's domestic terrorism, it's all kinds of things that we never saw before. And there are things that we haven't seen yet. And so I guess the challenge for folks like you, who I deeply admire and we need, is to be willing to have huge change in our military capability, almost constant change which is hard to do in such a big organization, and to be able to meet these threats as well as we have always met those threats throughout the world. Let me finally say this. We can lead by our economic force. We can also lead by our moral values and standards, and we must. But there is no one in the world who has the capability or is likely to have the capability to combine those two with real military structure and capability. And if you didn't think that was important, you only need to look at Saddam Hussein or Bosnia or Haiti or things that we haven't even dreamed of or thought of to understand why this capability is so vital and so necessary. The United States Navy, and I'm not being preferential, I was in the Air Force Reserves, but I believe in all of the capability. The United States Navy has the capability to take moving cities and put them anywhere almost instantly, and insert both air power and people in a very surgical and a very effective way. So we've got a lot of capability. It is truly remarkable. It depends on our economic power and our moral force, but it must be present. And the work of people like you is vastly needed. And I'm glad you're at MIT. And I'm glad you're learning so much. And I know you'll be a great part of that.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Will Monahan. I'm a junior at the college. You indicated you wanted to take the House back in the '98 elections. As you know, House races have traditionally been won on the local level with local issues. But on the other hand, it can be argued that the Republicans came to power in '94 with a national agenda. What is your strategy on taking back the House in '98, and is it a combination of either of those?
Right. It's always a combination. I believe we need two things: good candidates who run good campaigns in what's essentially a local race, and we need cutting national ideas that distinguish us from the Republican Party. I mean, part of what I'm trying to do today, and will continue to try to do with my colleagues, is to lay out a set of values and ideas that people can say, I may not agree with all of it, but there's some attraction in that for me. I want to vote for, I want to see what they can do. I want to be a part of that effort. And I want to say before I leave here, I grew up in the Kennedy period. I was deeply moved by both John and Bobby Kennedy. And I believed in the ideals that they talked about. And one of the great things about this school and the institute that Phil runs is that it's a living organism that continues to try to excite and challenge young people to be involved in the political process. And I hope some of you will. I am in politics because of idealism. I was out we had a member who died a few weeks ago, Walter Capps. He was a religion professor at Santa Barbara, University of California. And I was out campaigning with him, and one of his constituents a year ago asked me, was I more or less idealistic than when I started in Congress 20 years ago? Good question. I said I'm more. And I really mean that with all my heart. Every day I walk, Phil would say this, I know he would. Every day you walk, Bill Klinger's here as well. Every day you walk in the place, you're in awe of what we have done. And let me just spend a minute with you on what we have. People gripe at me about Congress's inability to do things, its slowness, its frustrating pace, its stupid mistakes. And I say, yes, I accept all that. And then I say, have you ever been on a committee? Yes. How many were on the committee? 12, 15. Was it hard? Oh, it was terrible. We all disagreed about everything. I say, imagine you're on a committee of 535. That's Congress. They come from all over the country, all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of beliefs. They disagree on everything. Everything. I'm amazed we get anything done. I'm serious. When you see it every day, you come away realizing that on the big conflicts, we're there to resolve conflict. We're there to bring consensus, to move the country forward. It's a huge group of people. I'm the Democratic leader. You know what I worry about every day? I got 207 people I got to communicate with. Every minute of every day, I got to let them know what's happening. I don't want them to just get it out of the media and the press. It's a huge organism. It's a huge group of people, and it works. There's a recent book called The Genius of the People. It's about the Constitutional Convention in 1787. It's kind of a diary. You ought to get it. And it's a wonderful recounting of the debates they went through. And what I read it the other day, and what I got out of it, James Madison was the guy, the go-to guy. He was the guy. He really came there with a purpose. I mean, you know, Bill and Phil tell you that you got to watch the one that comes into a meeting with a plan. I mean, that's the one that's going to get it done. And he came with a plan. He was the only one that had a plan. He got it approved by his delegation. He came with a plan. And his passion was to make sure that the people elected at least the House, all the people in an equal manner. Why did he want it? He wanted it because he wanted no one to have tyranny over the Congress. Not the rich, not the poor, not the landowners, not the farmers, not the business, no one. He achieved it. No one has control of the place. It's chaos. It's as chaotic as the American people. It works. Now, if you want to sit around and worry about something, worry about campaign finance reform. That's what you got to worry about. And I don't have any brilliant answers. It's one of the toughest puzzles I've ever faced. It's a Rubik's Cube. But we got to start. We got to get going. We got to do things. We can do things. But I'm more idealistic about the Congress and about this country, and I want you, some of you, to give part of your life and part of your time to this greatest democracy in the history of the world. I go to these other countries. You go to China, you go to Russia, you go to any of these places, and you say, what are your problems? Number one problem, we don't have a legal system. We don't have a legal system. We gripe about the law, we gripe about the Congress, we gripe about, what an achievement we have. What a gift we've been given. And the only way we lose it is if we walk away from it. If we get so cynical about it. Say it doesn't work. It's all rife with money and special interests. I want no part of it. I'll go off and make my money and stay as far away from it as I can. If everybody decides that, we're gone. We can't do that. We need you, the brightest, the best, to be in the middle of it, to say politics is noble, it's good, and what it achieves is good. And I hope that if I got nothing else across tonight, that somebody here tonight will say, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Time for only one more question. That'll be the last question, so people standing can say, we run out of time. This is it.
My name is Eric Shapsis. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. And first, on behalf of the Campaign and Elections PIC, Professional Interest Council, we're very happy that you came to speak with us tonight.
Thank you.
My question is regarding public education, and I'm very glad that someone is bringing it to the forefront because it's kind of been locked away for so long. And I agree with your assessment. My question / concern is that in a 1996 article in the U.S. News and World Report, there was talk about education reform would happen quicker and sooner if it weren't for the powerful teachers unions who have kind of been slowing it back a little bit. That in part they are the ones that are not allowing the school day to go longer, the school year to go longer, and some of the other reforms that you talked about to make the school a little bit more of a community center. As someone that has spent a lot of time in Congress like yourself, and has also been a champion of workers and a good friend to the unions, what role do unions have in the debate without capitalizing the debate and allowing the education reforms to go forward?
Well, first let me say that I think to really get reform in public education, which as I said, I think is extremely important, and child care. It is really a larger piece than just education. We have to resist the temptation to try to find the culprit. The unions or the administrators or the teachers or the students or the parents or the buildings or whatever it is the favorite culprit of the day. There's plenty of blame to spread, including to Congress and including to state legislatures and boards of education. The witch hunt has got to stop. We first have to say that most of public education today is highly successful. One of the really, I think, damaging things of the late debate has been the assertion that all of public education is a failure. It's not. Most children get a great public education. I'm a product of the public schools of St. Louis. My children all went to public grade school and high school. I think it was a wonderful experience. I think I got a good education. I think they got a good education. The problem that I see with both child care and education, as I tried to say, is that the world has vastly changed. Parents spend 1/3 less time with children today than they did 15 years ago. Most of education takes place in the home with the child, with the family. If parents are not present, because they can't be, you may have a single parent who works 2 jobs. They're not home. We have to find ways of both involving them to the extent possible and being able to fill in holes through the revolution in public education that I tried to talk about. That has to happen. Now let me talk about what we're learning about babies. We now know that by age 3, most of the fight is either won or lost. By age 3. The brain, I don't know if you saw this research, I'm sure some of you may have been involved in some of it. The actual physical size of the brain of a child who's been properly stimulated and dealt with is double the size of a child who is not. This is not rocket science. This is simple. We got to get on this. We got to get serious about it. We got to allocate sufficient resources to it. But most of all, we have to incite every American to join the cause. It's what I said. People say to me, what can I do? I'll tell you what you can do. Go to the local school. Get involved with your children. Be a part of the effort. Even if you don't have children, go and do it. This is an amazing country. The deciding is the hard part. Once we decide, it's over. It's done. World War II, imagine what happened. Everybody got involved. Everybody took a part. Everybody just did it. A lesser example is Sputnik. Sputnik went off. Everybody was scared to death. My God, we're so far behind. Passed the National Defense Act. We put all this money into mathematicians and scientists and so on, and we got them. 3 years later, they were coming off the line. They were there. I mean, it was unbelievable what happened. This is an incredible country. We haven't decided. We got 15 things in front of us. You got to do children, babies. It's our passion. It has to be our mission. So I've been in front of teachers' unions all over this country. I've been in front of them in St. Louis. I've been in front of them in Seattle. I've been in front of them in lots of cities. They are not the problem. People are in education to educate. They love kids. They are not the problem. There's a new superintendent in Seattle, Washington. He was a Colin Powell devotee, a disciple, one of his assistants. in the Persian Gulf War. He's a very talented guy. He was a general. He had no part in education. You know what he did? He came into the Seattle school system. He sat down with all the teachers. He said, "What's the problem?" They said, "Nobody's accountable." I'm sitting there with the teachers union head. I said, "Did you say that?" He said, "Yeah, all our teachers say that. That's the truth." I said, what did the superintendent do? He said, "He made us accountable." He requires on his desk every month a progress report on every student. And guess what? Test grades are going up. Everything's beginning to happen. They're involving the parents. They're getting the outcome. Central Park East in New York, in Harlem, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, getting great results, fabulous results. They got the numbers down. They do, a lot of preschool, after school. They demand a lot of their students. In that case, the teachers took over the school. They said to the New York school system 20 years ago, "Well, we don't think the way you're doing it's right. We're going to have a democracy here. We're going to figure this out." They have no metal detectors in the school. Principal told me, "We don't need them. We know the parents. We know the kids." She said, "I can guarantee you no kid would ever bring a weapon into this school." This is not complicated. It takes passion. It takes love. It takes concern. It takes respect. It takes intent, will. And if we can get that will on the part of every American, this will be done. Thank you.
Let me conclude by saying that we greatly appreciate the fact that Congressman Gebhardt chose the Kennedy School to deliver this important address, and frankness in answering the questions, and we want to assure you that we will welcome you back anytime you wish. Again, thank you very much.